station is Yūgen Pira Station. The doors on the right side will open. Please change here for the Pira Elevated Line, the Huda Elevated Line, the Yi Elevated Line, the Iro Elevated Line, the Arohi Line, and the Ether Subway Line.
もう1000年が経つ頃だろうか。人類の時代、アントロポロセンの終わりから、あるいは私の7世代も前の曽祖父がこの地球を離れてから。
Era una época caracterizada por nuestra existencia, humanos, con suficiente influencia para dejar un rastro indistinguible en la línea de tiempo geológica.
À ce moment-là, le monde était ravagé par un système économique et politique boursouflé, à l'agonie. Il menaçait notre mode de vie et l'écosystème de la planète. C'est alors qu'un comité secret composé de différents gouvernements vit le jour. Son but, apporter une solution. Sa réponse, l'ITSA, l'International Transgenerational Space Art.
Эта операция была скрыта от общественных классов. Были привлечены лучшие умы человечества – ученые, исследователи, академики, космонавты, инженеры. Наша миссия – создание межзвездного корабля.
Eine Arche, die unsere Spezies hinaus in die Tiefen des Alls tragen würde, durch die dunkle Leere treibend, auf der Suche nach einer neuen Heimat, die nur von einer Generation entdeckt werden kann, 100.000 Jahre von heute. Aber wir haben versagt, denn ich bin zurückgekehrt in ein Zuhause meiner weit entfernten Vorfahren, unserer Vorfahren. Es war eine fremdartige Welt für uns. So fremdartig, dass sich unsere Raumanzüge als äußerst nützlich erwiesen.
我们运用地球化的技术来稳定环境，以便我们进行搜索及救援活动，找寻那遍布在这充满水的两极世界里的部落。
This was the beginning of a new epoch, the Anthropiatricene, characterized by our existence with enough influence to reverse what we had started. We began a humble refuge, a camp to aid and nurture the people we had left behind. This refuge, adaptable to the coming elements, became to be known as Aster-yee-ah.
Welcome back everyone to another episode of Aster-yee-ah. Firstly, I'd like to thank the people who helped out with the translation and narrative that you heard during the cinematic. The first was in Japanese and was by Masaya, a friend I made from study abroad while in Japan, and he's currently studying in the States. Second was Spanish and was by Pablo, or SimNation TV. He makes reviews and informative videos mainly around the Sims franchise, including city builders like SimCity obviously, and City Skylines. Check out his channel when you have the chance. Third was in French and was by Neguchi Maruyama, a French-speaking City Skylines YouTuber. If you speak French and enjoy City Skylines, please check out his channel. He also pays attention to a large amount of detail, but even if you don't speak French and like quality building, I still recommend checking him out. The fourth narrative was in Russian and was by my friend Sasha, another friend I made during study abroad while in Japan. Fifth was in German and was by Oruga City, which a few of you may remember from my SimCity days with the Urban Design Large series. He's a German YouTuber, however his content is conducted in English, and he also pays great attention to design and details, so please check out his channel. Sixth was in Mandarin Chinese and was by Justin, a Taiwanese friend I made at my university several years back when he was studying abroad here. I got the chance to visit him while I was studying in Japan by flying cheaply and conveniently nearby to Taiwan. Lastly was in English and was by professional voice actress Kimmy Pops, or Kate. Well, the story behind Kimmy Pops was that I originally asked SimCity Brian, if you remember him from my SimCity days, to help me out if he could supply his voiceover. But believing he was unfit for the role, he recommended me the site Fiverr, and was willing to pay for the voice actor. But I refused by saying, let's meet halfway. Now, I never even knew this service or website existed, so it was an awesome first-time experience in working with Kimmy Pops to provide this voiceover in the cinematic for Aster-yee-ah. So I'd really like to thank Brian for recommending me the site and also help paying for the voice actress. But it wasn't just him alone. I also used the support that I received from my patrons from my Patreon page to make it happen. Lastly, I want to say thanks to Kimmy Pops for your wonderful talents as a voice actress. Credits to the channels of the contributors are in the video description below if you need any more information. During my long absence, I went through several creative blocks. I played City Skylines on and off, building ideas and even recording entire episodes. But I was repeatedly discontent with what I had produced and scrapped the footage again and again. And I felt the same way about the last episode, featuring Star Wars content, which I considered poorly made. To get Aster-yee-ah back on track, I am replacing the previous Star Wars episode with this episode. During the absence, I eventually decided to lay off the game and focus on school, which ultimately prolonged this release. While in school, where I am not at the computer to start up City Skylines, I decided to daydream and develop a bit of backstory for Aster-yee-ah. I wanted the story to take place far in the future, where our world today is history like that of the Romans or the ancient Egyptians to us. What if the scenarios that are so popular now, like nuclear war or climate change, rendered us nearly extinct and we had the chance to start over, in the right way? Anthropocene is a word to arguably describe the geological time that we are in now, the age of humans. I said arguably because technically we are considered to be in the Holocene epoch, which is part of the Cenozoic era, the age of mammals. The Holocene began about 11,000 years ago since the last major glacial advance, and since then we only had one minor cooling period known as the Little Ice Age, sometime between the 1200s to 1700s. The reason why the Anthropocene doesn't definitively replace Holocene is because technically modern humans have been on this planet way longer than just 11,000 years. The recent discussion of using Anthropocene now is because ever since the Industrial Revolution, we have vastly changed ecosystems and the geochemistry of the Earth. Humans live on about 85% of the world's surface, and many scientists have declared to name this new era because of the scale of our influence. Man finally had the power to influence or leave an indistinguishable mark in the geological timeline. Seen through soil records, we can see the rise in carbon dioxide from our fossil fuel burning power plants, or the first atomic bomb leaving traces of radioactive isotopes across the whole world. All of these are now fossils, and if we humans were to suddenly vanish, perhaps a new dominant species will arise, or even extraterrestrials could explore our planet and see our impact on the world that were drawn in the past 200 or 300 years, seeing a spike in greenhouse gases and radiation in the soil or ice samples. During the cinematic, I said another term that was similar to Anthropocene, Anthropiatricene. This is a word I had made up. Firstly, let's break down what Anthropocene means. Anthropo, a prefix from ancient Greek for human, and scene, meaning new from ancient Greek as well. Piecing it together means new human, or new age of the humans. With Anthropiatricene, I tried to find some words that would fit the type of word that I am aiming for. Anthropo again, meaning human. Iatri, a word from ancient Greek meaning to heal. Again, ending with scene to mark the epoch. This comes together as new human healing, or new age of healing, by humans. During the narrative, these future humans who are the descendants of the first generation of the ship have returned to Earth, and have discovered that it has vastly changed in the past 1,000+ years, becoming engulfed by climate change and remnants of the old world. They used their terraforming technology to stabilize the planet's weather for them to settle. This was the beginning of a new epoch, the Anthropiatricene. That what these future humans are doing can be seen through fossil records, for example, a decrease in radioactive material across the world and greenhouse gases. Obviously, by now you can see the theme and the path I am trying to tell this story. Throughout the series, we can see this fictional timeline dealing with climate change / global warming. But let's talk about these two terms, climate change and global warming. Climate change and global warming are often interchangeably used in journalistic reporting, but they are in fact two different things. According to North Carolina State University, global warming refers to the rise in global average temperatures. Climate change is how the climate of different areas around the globe change over time, recently due to this global average temperature increase, which affects the water cycle, carbon cycle, and other natural systems that have been stable throughout the many millenniums. Climate change can occur naturally, either through changes in intensity of the sun that affects the amount of sunlight being sent to Earth, or the growth of mountains that changes the route of air currents, which can make regions drier or wetter. But what is the difference of weather and climate? Weather refers to a single event, like a day's worth of behavior of the weather. This weather behavior recorded over a long period of time, like a decade or more, reveals a pattern or trend which can be used to predict the climate of a region. A simple example: a desert experiences a hot day of weather, and we record decades of hot days in this desert region, and this reveals a trend. Thus we conclude that the climate of that region is dry and hot. So when we experience a day of harsh blizzards, even though we constantly hear of global warming or climate change happening now on the news, this doesn't mean it discredits climate change or global warming. Because again, climate is a record of behavior of weather over a long period of time, and global warming increases the average temperatures. So regions of the Earth that normally receive decent heat experience more heat, therefore receive harsher droughts or more rain than usual. For northern regions and, well, everywhere else too, this results in shorter winters and longer summers, and actually the eradication of spring and autumn in the future as climate change continues to intensify. According to the scientific community and the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change, our human influence is the #1 cause of this change, due to the surplus of greenhouse gases that is not just our cars and trucks, but our agriculture of livestock, and including our expansion of our cities that creep into natural habitat. Taken from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, the ocean is the #1 consumer of the CO2 we produce. When CO2 is absorbed by seawater, chemical reactions occur that reduces the pH of the seawater. This also saturates the environment with biologically important calcium carbonate minerals. The calcium carbonate is a building block for skeletons and shells of many marine organisms. However, when the oceans continue to intensify in acidity, this causes many parts of the oceans to become undersaturated in these minerals. Ocean acidification is expected to affect ocean species in varying degrees. Like algae and seagrasses may bloom from higher CO2 concentration, but a more acidic environment will have a dramatic effect on calcifying species like oysters, clams, corals, and some species of plankton and etc. This will completely offset the ecosystem, which consists of many complicated food webs. Ecosystems are highly complex natural systems where organisms have varying relationships with other organisms, mutual or not. But when one or more participants of an ecosystem become affected by something, like climate change, the whole system can collapse until it can adapt and evolve into a new ecosystem fit for a new environment. But that won't happen for many thousands or even millions of years. As you already know, we humans like to do things fast, and we want our things now, like when we watch a video on YouTube but it's buffering, or there's an ad in front of it. Our perception of time is very quick compared to other species. Like just 10 years ago, flip phones were all the rage, and now today we have touchscreen phones becoming the size of tablets. We change fast, but nature does not. A lot of people say that Earth will always be here, and yes indeed. But the changes in the environment that threatens the planet also threatens our existence, and this goes against our human interests. We want to live long enough to maybe bear children and see them have their own families down the line. Some of us want to prosper and accumulate wealth, either wealth in monetary funds or wealth in happiness. We want to grow and see change or experience new things that the future brings, like eventually we'll have flying cars or hoverboards. The Earth will always be here and will eventually recover no matter what happens, but will we be here? That is our human interest, and this human interest is portrayed in the desire to change. Cities all across the world, especially those on the coast, like my state, Florida, are trying to find ways to reshape and adapt their cities to become more tolerant to climate change. From the Florida Oceans and Coastal Council, it is widely accepted that human activities can impact the global climate patterns. While there are legitimate disagreements among scientists on the nature, magnitude, and impact of these changes, the potential risks to Florida's natural resources and our economy compel us to seek a thorough understanding of possible impacts and to provide current and future generations with the information necessary to adjust to them. Sea level has risen slowly during the period of Florida's modern settlement. Over the course of centuries, when sea level was stable by geological standards, natural systems developed an intimate relationship with the land, sea boundary. Marshes and mangroves expanded to the very limit of their abilities. intertidal oyster reefs become closely calibrated to tides, and seagrass beds grew as deeply as light penetration allowed. Humans have followed the same course. Today, across the coastlines of the state, our infrastructure has extended as far out and as far down as we have been able to engineer. We live literally at the edge of the sea. Over the course of recent decades, the slowly rising sea level has affected structures such as roads, drains, seawalls, and buildings that were originally built with some margin of safety from the water's edge. An example of action in the current world is the Sky Mile High Tower in Tokyo, Japan, which is 2 times as tall as the Burj Khalifa. If you guys remember from the last episode about the Yggdrasil ecology, I used the Millennium Tower for its place, a planned building set in Tokyo Bay. But now, the successor of a massive arcology in Tokyo Bay is the Sky Mile High Tower. Japanese officials began a project known as Next Tokyo to combat overpopulation and growing environmental problems from climate change like increased flooding from sea level rise. The objective of this project is to build a megacity by 2045, adapted for the coming changes in the environment. Kohn Peterson Fox Associates and Leslie E. Robertson Associates collaborated in proposing a vision for a new city in Tokyo Bay, while also considering other natural disasters than climate change like earthquakes, tsunamis, and typhoons. It will be a residential tower for 55,000 people, with friendly public transportation options, and features hexagonal structures serving multiple purposes ranging from harbors, storm surge barriers, beaches, urban farming, and pools of algae that will be utilized for biofuel. Another example of action is the Netherlands' 30-year €20 billion plan to fight rising tides from sea level rises. The plan calls for the whole country ready for the effects of global climate change by 2050 and features new sea barriers and dikes as most of the country lies below sea level. There are also other plans in place to lower half of the 1990s levels of greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. In 1953, there was a disastrous flood that killed almost 2,000 people in Zeeland. The Dutch built a large system of dams, storm surge barriers, dikes, and other water management utilities. This project was collectively known as Delta Works. Environmental Minister Melanie Schutz van Hagen, presenting the plan to Parliament, called it a new chapter in the history of our centuries-long relationship with water. The surplus greenhouse gases disrupt the delicate balance that our climate has already adjusted for in a previous setting. Climate is a long period record of weather patterns, and when we plot out this data of decades of weather patterns, we can see the trend that determine a region's climate. On average, the world is increasing in temperature, and the argument is that the surplus greenhouse gases are caused by continued anthropogenic influences like our agriculture of livestock, fossil fuel burning, our car culture, and our urban expansion. Overall, there will be more intense storms, acidification of oceans, and deadlier droughts. Eventually, autumn and spring will become nothing but a mythological experience described in our literature, music, and cinema. Aster-yee-ah is possibly in an exaggerated timeline far in the future, but again I wanted to create a story that plays off the age-old saying of, "We are our worst enemy." And a lot of people take this quote personally, like whether we can get that job or not. Sometimes others feel victimized for failing and blame the establishment, or some blame themselves for not being adequate enough for the job. Our minds or egos can get in the way of many things, especially progression and character development. This leads to another quote: "You have nobody else to blame but yourself." So what if we did cause this disaster that nearly wiped us out, and during that period of our near extinction we tried to save our species by sending them off into space? And in this case, a transgenerational space arc, a concept that we have families of humans on board a spacecraft drifting through space, and eventually, like 100,000 years later, a spaceborne human generation can set foot on a new habitable planet when they finally find one. But in Aster-yee-ah, we have the space arc turning around and heading back to Earth to find that the people they had left behind nearly destroyed themselves. And this reminds me of some of the great questions we have asked for extraterrestrials. Where are they, and why haven't we seen them yet? Well, conspiracies aside, but perhaps aliens aren't contacting us because they probably destroyed themselves by war or climate change, or naturally killed off by either disease or an asteroid. But for us, in this story, let's say we are the lucky ones, that escaped our self-destructive behaviors and finally gave life on Earth another chance. You could say it's a very optimistic view, but I wanted to do something that isn't as common in our present time, like popular end-of-the-world scenarios in media culture such as Fallout, The Walking Dead, or The Division, which generally paints a darker picture. What if we had another chance and we did it right? That's the point of this whole series anyways, a humanistic and environmental approach of how we can build our future cities of living on this planet, the only home we ever known. I've conducted the cinematic narrative with many different languages to symbolize the international community, united and speaking about our one home. We have a spaceborne generation of humans who were the descendants of an international selection of astronauts, academics, and etc. that are chosen for this mission. It's similar to our modern-day space program that isn't necessarily national-driven, but a collective effort like that of the International Space Station, every country doing their part in the greater plan. I've decided to name this whole region Weltschmerz, dedicated to the remnants of the past as reminders of what the world once was. It is a German word coined by German author Jean Paul of the Romanticism era, and is literally translated as world pain. But it actually refers to the sadness of mismatched views of an ideal world and the actual reality. I think our ideal world is that we want to live in peace and treat things as if it'll last forever, having security, prosperity, and no problems. But in reality, we are far from living in a permanent or even long-lasting peace, and things don't last forever, in terms of human interests. Weltschmerz, in German philosophy, is an emotional response, a mental depression that differs from pessimism, which is an idea that there is more bad than good. In this district, I've created 3 things that symbolizes the reality of our modern world, that is different from the ideal world like in an adaptable, eco-friendly world. We have these massive freeways, megastructures that serve our ever-growing car culture, and not only consume space, but contributes to climate change and the segregation of communities. They are filled with abandoned evacuating cars, escaping flooding or war. We also have a large open-pit mine that is flooded from heavy rains, and it shows the scarring of the earth by our expansion and our exploitation of the planet for short-term economic gain. Lastly, the suburbs, a city design that became so popular in the past century, half eaten by the sea, and is not only bad for the environment, but it is a living environment mainly designed for the car, not for humans, which is more focused on better walkability and closer proximity for greater community value and local economy. Suburbs are a huge waste of land, and it pushes us apart, leaving us to value ourselves and privacy more than our community. It's a stark contrast from our original city designs, which were very dense, walled cities. It was more efficient in terms of protection from invaders. But this close proximity creates a large emphasis on local economy like you see in traditional imagery of ancient cities from Europe to Asia, with the butcher on this street, the carpenter on the corner of the street, and the blacksmith on the block over. The sadness derives from this region that the world failed to change, and we left it in ruins for these future humans to discover the destruction. In our current day, cities are trying to combat climate change for choosing greener options like addition of more public transportation and investing in renewable energy. Whether climate change is real or not, I think it is still a worthy investment of continuing to evolve our cities to become more adaptable to the earth, and that is also less harmful to it and to us. Because cities aren't just machines of remarkable engineering, but they too are vibrant organisms that change with culture and the environment. Now let's talk about the second portion of this video. I'm going to go back to Yugen and remove the university that I had built in the Star Wars episode, since that episode is no longer valid for this series. The focus of this portion of the episode is to get back on track with Aster-yee-ah principles and reality, with the reformation of Yugen, first starting with the 4 central stations, since the original train station used is no longer on the workshop, so the asset itself has disappeared. I have 2 plans. Number 1. Reform the train stations to serve as a multi-purpose center for train transportation and bus transportation, as well as adding green space of cultural integration and/or a university. Number 2 is to link all 4 train stations by transforming the landscape of Yugen to accommodate a new green belt to bring in more green space for the citizens. This will also act as a pedestrian highway, as citizens can utilize an elevated bike trail that can reach any part of Yugen. If you remember from the last episode of the Yggdrasil episode, I spoke briefly about the inner city neighborhood, which further demonstrates the density principle, but also being mindful to add in green space, so that way the citizens don't always feel claustrophobic, having massive skyscrapers enveloping the sky and giving no headroom. For the 4 central stations, I've decided to go after a theme in classical history, the classical elements, particularly in ancient Greece. The 4 classical elements, and sometimes others, are fire, water, earth, and air. Each of the 4 stations will take on one of these elements, and I will build a design to fit with their designated theme. I thought about this idea because I wanted to incorporate our traditional ideology as well, which can be seen as very poetic and artistic to our senses now. As I said since episode 1, the city is loosely modeled after the pulsar map, and in the center of the pulsar map is Earth. well, technically the Sun on the pulsar map, but this describes our relative position in the galaxy. This is also seen in the introduction logo for Asteria, with the center circle with the cross representing the meridian line and the equator, therefore Earth. As for the train stations, how will I design them? Will they still be submerged? Yes, of course. But what will I put on top? I took inspiration from many sources as well as my own ideas, but one example I want to share is the Hudson Yards. The Hudson Yards is the largest private real estate development in the history of the United States, and is the largest development in New York City since the Rockefeller Center. It will be built atop the open-air rail yard in West Manhattan. The 17 million square feet site will feature 14-acre public open spaces, commercial facilities, and residential space, accommodating over 5,000 residences, 750 seats for a public school, and more than 100 shops that will see over 24 million visitors. How it will be built is through the technique I had explained in the last episode about caissons. These caissons will be drilled through the only available space in the rail yard, which is about 38% of the site, and reach the bedrock to support the new towering facilities. Trusses will be added to connect all of the caisson pillars for stronger integrity. The Hudson Yards will also be a transportation hub, featuring the number 7 subway extension, and is very close to other options like a 5-minute walk to Pier 79 ferry, access to surrounding 4 airports, and a 10-minute walk to the Port Authority bus terminal. The architects and the planners of this project had 4 principles in mind. Firstly, the collaborative vision of bringing innovators to building a new urban future, creating a neighborhood that reflects a holistic design approach of business, fashion, art, commerce, design, technology, and cuisine. Second is refined curation, to weave the latest and best thoughts in different fields to create a fresh experience that is welcoming and hopes to speak for forward thinkers, to continue to evolve with time and taste. Third is master craftsmanship, is that each shop and restaurant at Hudson Yards will have its own masterpiece and innovation, inducing a unique and inspiring experience for consumers and residents. Lastly, humanity-based innovation, which is to bring people together. With New York's colorful cast, it will be a place with given technological capabilities that allow people to engage in their continued or new connections, improving the quality and experience of the neighborhood. The Yugen Central stations will be similar to the Hudson Yards in many aspects, since it will feature green space in Asteria as well as cultural and educational centers for the city. These stations will allow the citizens of Aster-yee-ah to easily have access to all parts of the city, within walking distances to transfer to other stations, as well as connecting to the pedestrian highway that circles Yugen. Also, what goes through each of these stations is the Yugen Greenbelt, which also serves as a bus terminal. Buses from all over the city, including local buses of Yugen, will have their stops along this greenbelt and stop at each station. I was looking for more ways to integrate green space, and for those who have seen the Star Wars episode, I was trying to find ways in doing so by adding a university. But with that removed, so why not add a green belt? I want to prioritize green space in Aster-yee-ah, and one of the greatest examples of this that I want to share is the Boston Big Dig. Taken from New Green Space for the City of Boston by Chris Vernick for Professor Stephen Schmidt of Cornell University, the Big Dig was the largest public construction project in the United States. With an initial budget of $2.8 billion, the project swelled to consume $14.6 billion by its completion in 2004. It is estimated that the final cost with interest is $22 billion. The primary advocate, Frederick Salvucci, designed it with prioritization in green space, walkability, and socially reconnect sections of the city and improve public transportation. In the middle of the 1950s, when President Eisenhower's U.S. Federal Highway Administration initiative was in full swing, Boston's status as a major economic center was wavering. John Hines, mayor elected in 1950, wanted to re-establish Boston as a premier city. With the introduction of the Massachusetts Turnpike, the Prudential Center, and the new Central Artery. The artery was intended to alleviate traffic that filled the roads of the city and serve as part of the highway integration network. At that time, highways were seen as huge innovations and romanticized as getaways from the city and into the suburbs with the booming automobile industry, while also serving as an evacuation route for citizens and a fast deployment pathway when nuclear war or any other kind of emergency broke out during the tensions of the Cold War. Elevated highways were glamorized as futuristic and sexy roads, driving in the sky and conveniently getting off by ramps at your destination, and vice versa. However, this was far from the truth. Weltschmerz. The new elevated highway that slashed through Boston plagued the city with even more traffic problems due to its 34 poorly designed entrance and exit ramps. This rose the accident rate 4 times the national average. Not only it did not solve the traffic problem, but it destroyed over 100 residences and 900 businesses in its path, separating the north end from the rest of the city. Frederick Salvucci, ironically, started the largest highway construction in the history of the country, when it was part of the Peoples Before Highways movement. His objective was to push the central artery underground and various other things that would solve the traffic crisis. What resulted in pushing the central artery underground was the resurfacing of the above-ground space in central Boston, notably the Rose Kennedy Greenway. With the highway now underground, this lowered air pollution levels. According to the Economic Development Research Group, their traffic data shows a 12% decrease in carbon monoxide. The higher percentage of pollution prior to the project was exacerbated by the stop-and-go traffic on the elevated highway. In neighborhoods surrounding the old artery, the data shows a 25 to 33% decrease in noise levels. I want to do a similar thing here in Aster-yee-ah. I'm going to try to ban most elevated highways in the city. Only in certain scenarios will we have elevated highways. Most highways will be submerged underground, as I originally said in episode 1. I know maybe a few of you are screaming at me now for removing the highways, since a lot of us love highways because we're living in an era of automobile obsessions. But I think adding in subways, to the extent that I did, really goes against the aim Aster-yee-ah is trying to be, an eco-friendly and socially connected city. Yes, highways do allow us to connect with one another, but there are already tons of mass transportation options, and I would like to mention that highways segregates neighborhoods. No matter how much I try to minimize its footprint by making it stacked, its dark shadow still exists for pedestrians that walk beneath it, though there is an exception for elevated rail lines. I think in this time period, private transportation like cars are at a minimum, meaning almost everyone doesn't have a car, or if they do, it will most likely be autonomous driving. But for practical reasons with city skylines, like the mechanics of how commercial zones and industrial zones work in the game, we must retain large sections of the highway system to feed the city with tourists and freight. But I will try to mask that by driving the highways underground. But why remove them anyway? Isn't it counterintuitive? The main idea that I've been trying to push since episode 1 is to develop a city that is not automobile dominated, but rather pedestrian dominated, with many mass transportation options. Let's go over some of the history of highways. In the United States, you may notice that we love our cars. We have highways cutting through our cities like a messy surgical disaster, with our wide 8-lane highways to sprawling interchanges. Taken from an article by Joseph Stromberg of Vox.com, we gutted our cities for this new method of transportation for a few critical reasons that ultimately created the face of our 20th and 21st century cities. The story begins with the decline of the streetcar, or trams, that lost its luster in most of American cities because they were privately owned and had poor profitization. To fill in this void, automobile industry saw an opportunity to fill this gap with buses and private transportation like cars, and the survival and prosperity of highways. But in order to make this happen, required a bit of marketing that changed the landscape of toll roads into a world with free roads. The industries and interest groups decided that imposing a tax on gasoline would be enough to pay for the expansion of highways themselves. The term free roads eventually evolved into what we now call freeways. Though the gasoline tax didn't pay for the roads fully, it only accounted for about 43% to 74% of the funding for the highways. With the financial basis laid, the industry groups began envisioning a future with massive, wide, and smooth highways. These highways would allow distant cities to become connected, and an example of this vision was General Motors' giant 1-acre diorama featured in the 1939 World's Fair in New York, called Futurama. World War II delayed the construction of this large project, but in the post-war, suburban sprawl became a popular design model that seeked to have people commute from their homes in the suburbs and into downtown for work. At that time, highway engineers were nearly non-existent, but those that did exist only knew how to make an efficient highway from point A to point B. This involved in cutting through downtown areas to allow convenient entry into the core of the city. A little more than a decade after World War II, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 that birthed the interstate system, and this highway expansion plan had the support of President Eisenhower, who saw Nazi Germany effectively mobilize millions of troops across two major fronts with their Autobahn system. He saw the importance of the highway system as a means for evacuating citizens in case of a nuclear disaster during the Cold War and deploying military forces to wherever it is needed. Though for military and safety reasons, this wasn't the only reason highways were advocated in building through cities. Many local politicians saw highways as an opportunity for urban renewal, which was the displacement of lower-income communities, mostly African Americans. It was an idea of, let's get rid of the blight. And highways was a tool for justifying the removal of these people. Many neighborhoods, most predominantly black, were decimated and replaced with parking lots and highways. The highways was also a means of segregating those displaced people from the city. which they became bounded by 8 lanes or more of asphalt and concrete, leading to overcrowding and increased crime. This pattern was repeated throughout the United States. Fast forwarding to the present, there are examples of cities removing highways that actually benefited the city, and I want to take lessons of their approach to this problem for Aster-yee-ah. I've read a book called Cities 2.0, which has a collection of essays with ideas of transforming the cities of the future. In 2012, TED, or TED, awarded the first prize to not a person, but an idea of collaborative proportions in what our future depends on, our cities. One of the ideas was Cities Without Highways, an essay and a TED Talk by Deanna Lind, who was the former executive director and editor-in-chief of Next City America magazine. One of the examples she noted of highway removal was the Embarcadero Freeway, San Francisco. In 1989, an earthquake damaged the stacked freeway, and there has been debate since the early 1980s in removing this highway. The earthquake spurred the discussion, which led to the demolition beginning in 1991. Where it once stood is now a home to a beautiful boulevard with miles of public space, walking and bike paths, and new transit routes. The removal of the highway saw an economic boom for the city, increasing the land value of the area by 300%. Another example I had found was in Cheonggyecheon, Seoul, South Korea. In 1976, the city built an elevated highway over a waterway as a means of boosting economic prospects in a low-lying area that had become a slum. In 2003, the city's mayor proposed the removal of the freeway, and this new green space naturalized a creek that once ran there. The new green space dropped the local temperature several degrees, and wildlife like birds and fish returned to the urban landscape. With the freeway now gone, people find different ways of entering the city, like public transportation. In Seattle, Washington, the city is demolishing the Alaskan Viaduct after an earthquake in 2001 damaged the double-decker freeway. They are remaking it as a tunnel in order to reclaim the Seattle waterfront. This land redevelopment is part of a multi-part billion-dollar waterfront plan that aims to reinvigorate the area that had been living in the shadows of the freeway for half a century. Having the highway below grade revives the connections of local neighborhoods adjacent to the waterfront. This will involve in new public spaces and commercial businesses. One that isn't necessarily about highway removal, but building land over an existing highway, is the Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, Texas. It's a 5-acre deck that has been used to connect the uptown neighborhood and the Dallas Arts District and downtown. This deck will create green space, a park that will increase pedestrian connectivity and add in a natural landscape that relieves the urban fabric of the city. Now let's go over what was built. The first station was the Yūgen station, representing the fire element. The fire element will be displayed through a garden shaped like the sun and its rays. It's a garden dominated by red to yellow colored flowers and trees, emulating the color of fire and the sun. The second station is the Yugen station, representing the water element. I've used small water canals to display this element, as well as walkways dotted with cherry blossom trees to show the bond and tranquility between trees and the water. The green tower is the environmental department asset, and I used it because the green complements the blue and the pink colors of the scene. I will further explain the meaning of cherry blossoms in another episode. The third station is the Yugen station, representing the earth or terrestrial element. The station is modeled after a rocky landscape, dotted with small shrubs and not so thick trees next to large rocks. The uniquely looking blue building is the center of innovative technology asset, and I think the subtle dualism of the white and blue fits with the grayish and tan landscape of the rocky parts. The last station is the Yugen station, representing the air element. Features open spaces as well as an open-air theater. It is a university campus as well, having elevated pathways that reach into the air above the station and open areas. This allows for wider views of the elevated open area. The next station, which I didn't mention, element-wise, is the Yugen station, which is in the exact center of Yugen, occupying the area as a space elevator and a subway terminal. It is also connected by bicycling highways, just beyond the tram roundabout for easier access from the greenbelt that circles the district. I named it Aether, which is another element from ancient Greek classical elements. In Homeric Greek, Aether means clear sky or pure air, pure enough for the gods in the heavens to breathe. Aether in medieval science refers to the material that fills the universe, beyond Earth's atmosphere, and was used to explain how light travels and how gravity works, until we developed our modern theories and explanations. Since the center of Yugen represents a space elevator, I think it is rather appropriate to name it the Aether station. Two additional stations I'd like to add is the revision of the transportation hubs in the Masaya neighborhood. I ripped out the old train and bus terminals and replaced them with the new train stations similar to those in Yugen. Instead of having one bus terminal on one end and the train station on the other, both sides are train stations and bus hubs, since the sunken station asset consumes less space and can be attached to the bus prioritized roads. And in addition to all these train station revisions, I've decided to add trams into the city. Again, I am trying to aim for a mass transportation and walkability glorifest. After asking a question on my Facebook fan page about the pros and cons of trams, my subscribers answered, along with some research that I had done, and I'm convinced to add in trams. But I have minimally added trams into the city, and I will go further in detail about the use of trams in this city in another episode. So I am removing the second deck of the word beltway completely, including the highway that runs through the inner city neighborhood. At this point, I think this episode was mainly about reflection, a reflection in the choices we make and how we can better ourselves. To be honest, I expanded the highways for the wrong reason. I guess you could say I was trying to satisfy an interest inside me of building roads, and satisfying a niche of my audience who became to know me as the road god. Even YouTuber Sky Storm called me the Roadmeister. But I have to get away from that and think outside the box. This is Aster-yee-ah, and the aim is to make an eco-friendly and socially connected city of the future. Change involves sacrifice, including the things we like or love in order to achieve the best results. Much like we see with the fight against climate change, sacrificing parts of our lifestyle or just trying to adapt to the coming changes by innovating. Compromises only work when they are convenient, and so I must stay true in making Aster-yee-ah how it should be. No more massive highways. That's it for this episode, you guys. I will go further in detail about various topics in the future, like airports, trams, and what to do with the highway system. I'd also like to mention 3 new neighborhoods planned for the future centered around the Yugen area. These will be continuing the density and community principle I am after. I hope this episode was an enjoyable experience, and I know that this series is radically different from others, and that I just talk a lot about subjects pertaining to city development so seriously, but that's my style. I'm an aspiring filmmaker, and I have an interest in the world around me, civil engineering and architecture. As a hobby, I would like to share my interests and ideas, being supported by research I do in my spare time of similar projects around the world and history, and for YouTube gaming-wise, keep some degree of realism in the series even though this is set in the future. But the reality is, the future is always in the making. This is YouTube, and there are tons of personalities and playing styles out there, so I may not be for everyone. But I hope I can convince you to learn a bit more about the development of cities and how it affects our lives, but also the natural world, with this series about a future city set in a grim time period of human history. Thank you.